They thought I had already lost. And honestly, standing in that hallway outside courtroom 4, in my old gray jacket with a coffee stain on the sleeve I hadn't noticed until that morning. I thought so too. My son-in-law was laughing at something my daughter said. My daughter, the one I walked down the aisle 17 years ago. The one I held in the hospital the night she was born during a February snowstorm in Ohio. She was laughing too, her hand on his arm, not looking at me. They'd driven there together in his Lexus. I'd taken the bus. That's where I need to start, not the courtroom. The beginning. My name is not important. What I did for 41 years is, I was an electrician. A good one. Union card, benefits, the whole thing. I worked commercial builds, hospital retrofits, school projects across 3 counties. My hands know wire the way some men know wood or steel. I retired at 63 with a pension modest enough to keep me honest in savings. I'd build dollar by dollar because my wife, my late wife, Norma, she always said, don't spend what you haven't earned twice. Norma passed 8 years ago, pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I don't talk about that part much. What I will say is that after she was gone, the house on Clover Mill Road felt like a museum. Every room preserved exactly the way she left it. I kept her reading glasses on the nightstand for 2 years, couldn't move them. My daughter Renee was the one who pulled me back. She'd call every Sunday. She'd come by on holidays. She brought her boyfriend, later her husband, a man named Whitmore. No, that's not right. I'll call him what I called him then, my son-in-law, because that's all he ever really was to me. A title, not a person. He was in finance. I never fully understood what that meant except that he wore shirts that cost more than my electric bill and talked about leverage at the dinner table while I was trying to eat pot roast. He wasn't cruel to me. Not at first. He was something worse. Indifferent. The kind of indifferent that comes with a smile. He'd ask about my health, the way you ask about the weather. Not because you care what the answer is, but because silence would be awkward. Renee had changed around him, not all at once. That's not how it works. Slowly. The way a photograph fades if you leave it near a window. She still loved me. I believe that. But love, when diluted enough, starts to look a lot like obligation. The conversation happened on a Thursday in March. I remember because the Browns had just lost again and I had the game on mute while she talked. She said they'd been thinking. She said the house on Clover Mill was too big for one person. She said there was a very nice assisted living community 40 minutes away, just opened, lovely gardens, activities, other people my age. She said she and her husband would handle the arrangements. I was 68 years old. I was not confused. I was not forgetting things. I walked 2 miles every morning and still did my own taxes. I said, I'm not ready for that. She said, Dad, we just want what's best for you. That sentence. I have heard that sentence used to justify more harm than almost any other combination of words in the English language. I didn't argue. I told her I'd think about it. What I did instead was call my attorney, a man named Schofield who had handled Norma's estate and who I trusted the way you trust a good tool, precisely because he'd never tried to be more than what he was. I told Schofield everything. The conversation with Renee, the subtle pressure that had been building for months, the comments about the upkeep of the house, the suggestion that I sell my truck because a man your age shouldn't be driving that much, the time my son-in-law mentioned, casually, that the house on Clover Mill would be worth considerably more if I sold before the neighborhood changed. Schofield listened. Then he said something that changed the direction of everything. He said, Do you know what's in your will right now? I did. I had written it 7 years ago after Norma died. Everything to Renee. The house, the savings, the small brokerage account I'd built up over the years. She was my only child. It seemed simple. Schofield said, Let's make it less simple. I want to be honest here. I didn't do what I did next out of spite. I want to be clear about that because spite is cheap, and what I felt was not cheap. It was something heavier. Grief, maybe. The specific grief of watching someone you love become someone you don't quite recognize. Of realizing that the planning happening around you is not about your comfort, it's about your assets. Over the next 2 weeks, I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I went back through my bank statements. I found 3 withdrawals I didn't remember authorizing, each one just under the threshold that would trigger a flag, totaling nearly $19,000 over 14 months. They came from an account that Renee had co-signed access to, originally set up so she could help me if I was ever hospitalized. I had trusted her with the key and she had used it. I didn't confront her. I called Schofield. I also called the locksmith. Then I did something that felt strange and a little theatrical, but that Schofield said was important. I installed a small recording device in the kitchen, legal in my state for a homeowner to do, and I waited. I didn't have to wait long. The following Saturday, Renee and her husband came by for what she called just a visit. They walked through the house in a way I can only describe as proprietary. My son-in-law opened the door to my workshop, which he had never shown interest in before, and commented on the square footage. Renee asked gently if I'd given more thought to the transition. I said I was still thinking. After they left, I sat in Norma's chair by the window and watched their Lexus turn out of the driveway. I thought about the 41 years I had spent on job sites in weather that would make most men quit. The summers, the winters, the time I fell off a 6-foot ladder and drove myself to urgent care with a sprained wrist because we had a deadline and I wasn't going to let the crew down. I thought about every dollar I had not spent on things I wanted so that I could have something left. Something to leave. I thought about Norma saying, "Don't spend what you haven't earned twice." I picked up the phone and called Schofield again. The legal process that followed was not fast, and it was not pleasant. We filed a report with Adult Protective Services regarding the unauthorized withdrawals. We subpoenaed bank records. Schofield brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked at numbers the way I look at wiring diagrams. Like everything makes sense once you trace it back to the source. What he found confirmed what I suspected and added details I hadn't known. The withdrawals weren't impulsive. They were patterned, calculated. Started 11 months after Norma died, when I was at my lowest and not watching closely. In the meantime, my son-in-law had filed a petition through an attorney, claiming I was showing signs of diminished capacity and requesting that the court appoint a guardian to oversee my financial decisions. His attorney was smooth and well-dressed and spoke in the kind of measured voice that sounds reasonable even when the content is not. I was served papers on a Tuesday morning while I was making oatmeal. Renee called that afternoon. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said her husband had insisted and she'd tried to talk him out of it. She said she loved me and this was for my protection. I said, "I know, sweetheart." I hung up and finished my oatmeal. The hearing was set for a Thursday in October. I arrived 30 minutes early by bus because I had given my truck to my neighbor's son 3 weeks prior. Not because I couldn't drive, but because Schofield suggested reducing visible assets. And also because that young man needed a truck more than I needed a symbol. I sat in the hallway outside courtroom 4 in my gray jacket, and I watched my daughter and her husband arrive together, speaking quietly to their attorney, not looking at me. When they finally noticed me, my son-in-law's expression did something complicated. It was not quite a smirk, but it was close. The kind of look a man gets when he believes the outcome is already settled. My daughter looked at me with something I can only describe as preemptive pity, like she had already decided to feel bad about what was going to happen, and she was getting a head start. Their attorney presented the case for guardianship. He cited the state of the house, which he called in disrepair, which was not accurate but sounded damning. He referenced my age and what he characterized as social isolation since my wife's passing. He mentioned the truck I no longer had. He had a doctor's affidavit, which I later learned was obtained through a summary questionnaire rather than an actual examination, and which Schofield challenged immediately and successfully. My son-in-law sat at the table with his hands folded and his jaw set. Renee sat beside him. She kept her eyes on the table. Schofield presented our case. He presented the bank records. He presented the forensic accountant's report. He presented the recording from the kitchen, transcribed and authenticated, in which my son-in-law discussed the square footage of my workshop in a way that, in context, spoke clearly to intent. He also presented something I had prepared myself, a letter, addressed to the judge, written by hand on lined paper 5 pages, that I had mailed 3 days before the hearing so it would be in the court file. I am not a writer. I never claimed to be. But I am a man who has spent 41 years troubleshooting systems, finding where the current breaks, following it back to the fault, explaining the problem clearly so the crew knows what to fix. I wrote that letter the same way. I described what had happened, in order, without embellishment. I described the withdrawals and their dates. I described the conversations. I described the way my son-in-law opened my workshop door and called it square footage. I described what Norma had said about money. I described what it means to work your whole life for something and then watch people position themselves around it while you are still in the room. I did not ask for sympathy. I asked for a fair reading of the facts. The judge, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a lanyard, took the file with the letter in it and read for a while in silence. I watched her. My son-in-law was watching his phone under the table. Renee was still looking at the table surface as though it contained something useful. When the judge looked up, she looked at me first. Then she looked at my son-in-law. She said in a voice that did not require a microphone to carry, "Counselor, your client is aware that this court has now received documentation of financial transactions that your petition does not address?" The smooth attorney hesitated for the first time all morning. The judge continued. She described the bank records. She described the pattern. She referenced the forensic report. She used the word exploitation once, carefully and only once. But it landed in that room like a stone dropped in still water. I watched my son-in-law's hands, which had been folded so neatly on the table, come apart. I watched him touch his collar. I watched him look at his attorney with an expression I recognized, the expression of a man realizing that the system he had intended to use as a weapon has just turned around. Renee finally looked up. The guardianship petition was denied, formally, with language in the order that Schofield later told me was unusually direct for a civil hearing. The judge referred the bank record discrepancies to the county district attorney's office for review. She also noted, for the record, that the doctor's affidavit had been obtained improperly and would be referred to the state medical board. As we filed out of courtroom 4, my son-in-law walked past me without speaking. His jaw was still set, but the meaning had changed. Renee paused beside me in the hallway. She opened her mouth and then closed it. I could see that she wanted to say something. Maybe that she was sorry. Maybe that she hadn't known how far it had gone. Maybe something else entirely. I waited. But the words didn't come. I said, "I hope you find your way back to yourself." Then I put on my jacket and walked to the bus stop. Schofield called that evening. The district attorney's office had already made contact. There would be a formal investigation. It would likely take months. He said I should feel good about how the day had gone. I said I felt tired. That's the true answer. Not triumphant, not vindicated in the cinematic way people sometimes imagine when justice shows up. Just tired. And then, slowly over the following days, something else. Relief, maybe. The particular relief of a man who has carried a weight alone for a long time and finally set it down. The house on Clover Mill is still mine. I repainted the front door in April, a deep green that Norma always wanted, but we never got around to. My neighbor's son comes by on Saturdays and we drink coffee in the workshop while he learns electrical basics. He's quick. He'll be good at it. I still take the 2-mile walk every morning. I still do my own taxes. Norma's reading glasses are not on the nightstand anymore. I move them to the windowsill in the kitchen, where the light comes in, where I can see them when I sit down to eat. Not as a memorial. As a reminder. Don't spend what you haven't earned twice. I keep thinking about that coffee stain on my jacket sleeve. The one I didn't notice until I was already sitting in the hallway outside courtroom 4. That detail stays with me. Not because it's important, but because it's true. And I think that's what the whole thing came down to in the end. What's true, and what just looks true from a distance. My son-in-law was very good at the appearance of things. The right car, the right shirts, the right measured tone of voice when he said words like transition and what's best for you. He built a very convincing version of concern, a concern that's really about square footage isn't concern. It's inventory. And there's a difference, even if the words sound the same coming out. What I've come to understand is that the money wasn't ever really the point. The money was just the measure of something else. Whether I would notice, whether I would speak up, whether I still had enough self-respect left to say, no, this isn't right, and I'm going to do something about it. That's the thing about being underestimated. People assume that because you're quiet, you're unaware. That because you've been patient, you've been passive. They're not the same thing. Normie used to say, I thought in circuits, that I couldn't look at a broken thing without wanting to trace it back to where the fault was. She meant it as a gentle tease. But sitting in Schofield's office with 14 months of bank statements spread across his desk, I was grateful for it. The ability to look at something calmly and follow it to its source. That's not a small thing. It kept me from reacting too early, from confronting without evidence, from giving them reason to say I was erratic or emotional. I traced the fault. I documented it. I let the system do what it's designed to do when someone actually shows up with the truth. And showing up, that's the part nobody talks about enough. Not showing up angry, not showing up to make a scene. Showing up prepared, on time, with a 5-page handwritten letter already in the court file because I'd mailed it 3 days prior. That's not drama. That's discipline. 41 years of getting to the job site before the crew, of finishing what you start, of not cutting corners because no one's watching. That doesn't disappear when you retire. It's in how you carry yourself. It's in what you do when everything seems to be going against you, and you still have to decide what kind of man you're going to be in that moment. Renee paused beside me in the hallway after it was over. She wanted to say something. She couldn't find the words. I don't know what her path looks like from here. That's not mine to decide. What I know is that I meant what I said. I hope she finds her way back to herself. Not for my sake at this point. For hers. Because the version of her that stood silently while a fraudulent affidavit was filed against her father. That's not the girl I raised. Something happened to her along the way. I don't know if it can be undone. But I'm not going to carry hatred about it. Hatred is expensive, and I've always been careful with what I spend. The green door at the front of the house still makes me stop for a second every time I come home. Norma wanted that color for years, and we never got around to it. Small things have a way of outlasting large ones. I'm still walking 2 miles every morning, still doing my own taxes. The neighbor's son is getting fast with wire connectors, faster than I expected. Some mornings, watching him work, I think, this is what it's supposed to look like. Knowledge passed forward. Time used well. A man still of use in the world. That's enough. That has always been enough.